Welcome back to Small Caps, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kerry Stevenson, and it is coming up to Christmas, so it would be not right for me not to have a chat with Keren Paterson. She is the Managing Director of Trigg Mining. And most of you will know Trigg Mining because we've spoken before, sulphate of potash, Western Australia. This project it's a gift that keeps on giving. And it's getting bigger and larger, and Keren is putting together a fantastic team. So I've asked her to come on today because there's lots of news coming out of Trigg, and I want you guys to sit up and take notice because in the future, sulphate of potash, rather than muriate, which has got all those nasty little chemicals associated with it, sulphate of potash is going to be what's in absolute demand going forward. So you've got to have a look at this. This is a project which is getting bigger and bigger, is attracting very high caliber people to the project, great management team. And so let's have a chat with Keren. Good to see you.
You too, Kerry. Thanks for having me on the channel.
Well, do you know, I think that there's a lot of work that you've been doing and this project just keeps getting bigger. But before we start on that, let's do the little quick overview for those people that have been sleeping under the rock and might not know who Trigg are.
Well, Trigg Mining listed just over 2 years ago on the ASX with the intention of building mines communities can be proud of. And with that, we're exploring for sulphate of potash, which can be produced really sustainably through pumping, harvesting brine, really, hypersaline or potassium-rich brine from the eastern goldfields using solar evaporation to produce a really natural, potentially certifiable for organic use for our food supply. So it's a really efficient fertiliser. It provides 2 of the 4 macronutrients for plant growth and human nutrition, being potassium and sulphur. So it's all been a discovery since that time. We announced the resource in May for Lake Throssell and got very quickly underway with the scoping study, announced that beginning of October. And it's a project to scale. So we're talking about potentially 245,000 tonnes per annum, which is more than twice the size of the project currently under commission in Western Australia. So it's big. It's potentially a top 10 global producer of sulphate of potash. And we've only just started the story. So we've only drilled the first 36 kilometres of strike. At Lake Throssell, we've got about 70 kilometres there under tenure. Wow. And another project from about 35 kilometres to the south, which looks like it could be a repeat as well. So there's a lot to discover here at Lake Throssell, at Trigg, and the story is just only beginning.
Well, I think that's the important thing that I want people to understand. The story is only just beginning. And what Keren is doing out here, it's a big project. And as I said at the start, it's the gift that keeps on giving because you're finding more and larger resource. So let's start. Where should we start? Should we start with Throssel or Lake Yeo? Because I want to paint the big picture for people, and then I want to actually show them what the investment thesis is and why right now is a really, really good time to sit up and take notice of Trigg.
Well, let's start with Lake Throssell, which is the discovery, and we've got some of the flesh on the bones with the scoping study, and we can give it some numbers.
Great. Okay, so let's start with Throssell. It's, as you said, sulphate of potash project. What's the size of the resource?
About 14.4 million tonnes of contained and drainable sulphate of potash, which puts it right up there amongst a peer group of other projects in Australia. And there's also the exploration target. So as I said, that's just the first part of the drilling at Lake Throssell, and there's more to come after that. So there's another 2.6 to 9.4 million tonnes in exploration target, which we intend to convert into the resource as well.
And are you able to talk about the scoping study and what that gives you as well in terms of life of mine?
Absolutely. It's all out there. It's on the ASX in the public domain. Our initial mine life starts at 21 years, and that's representing just over 40% of the resource. So we can imagine when we convert more of that resource to indicated status, so that's the middle sort of confidence category when we're talking about mineral resources, and that can convert through to ore reserve. We're only scheduling at the moment about 40% of the total resource.
I'm looking at your face right now and you're quite excited about all this. Keren, I just have to ask you, when you first came across this project, did you expect it to be as big and growing as where you are right now? Because you mentioned in the beginning you listed 2 years ago. There's a lot of work that's gone on, and it just keeps growing. Has that surprised you to the upside? Just give us a view.
Yeah, it really has. We had a sense that it was going to be a really good, sustainable project, but the scale of it has just continued to surprise us. Everything that was done beforehand, all the remote sensing work. So there's a lot of data we can get from satellite. Australian Geoscience did a really great job putting a report together indicating the potential for the salt lakes. Lake Throssell was rated really highly. But you just don't know until you put those holes in the ground, and the holes really have absolutely delivered. So our expectation was a production rate much smaller than what we're talking about, looking at our peers and thinking what it may produce. But when we did our own homework and looking at what we can drain from that sustainably on an annual basis, it's turned out to be quite substantial, with potential upside to that as well as we drill more of the resource out too.
Are there any challenges associated with Lake Throssell? Are there any environmental challenges? Are there any native title challenges? Anything that's going to, I guess, stop this fantastic project from getting to where you want it to be?
At this stage, I'm not seeing any impediments to that. Obviously, we do need to work with our partners, the Nuttinjara traditional owners that have country. Most of our project sits in their country. We have an exploration agreement with them. We've done a number of heritage surveys already. They come down and have a look at what we're doing, get quite involved in the program. And because this is about food and nutrition, and we can do this really sustainably, it's something that we can all be really proud of, including our traditional owners. Environmentally, there's also the approval process. It's really important to make sure that we do all of our homework, and that's doing baseline surveys, which we started in April before we made the announcement of the discovery, because we really need to get a lot of that data. It covers a big area.
How big is the area, Keren? Just remind us how big is this area, because you're only just getting started.
Well, when I look at our map, Gruyere Gold Miners, there's this little pin drop next to our project. It's the entire salt lake is the resource, and the channel that sits underneath it that's feeding into the salt lake. The footprint of the project itself, when we look at building the halite ponds, is a very small part of that. But the entire area that we'll be putting bores and some trenches in is really quite large. These are big projects producing a large volume of necessary fertiliser.
Given, I have to ask this question, given that it is such a big project, do you think that people look at it and go, wow, it's so big and it'll be complex to get that into production? What would you say to people that have that comment?
It is quite different. It's not a gold mine, it's not a nickel mine, it's certainly not an iron ore mine. But there is a lot of understanding globally around how these channels work, how we can dewater them. I've dewatered a number of these systems to get to gold deposits in my career. It's a little bit different because we're looking at sustainable pumping as opposed to really short, sharp, lowering the water table so we can get in and dig the pit out. But because there's no open pit and there's no rock waste dump, it does simplify things somewhat from a mining perspective. But we also really need to understand that this is a chemical process, right, in that we need to understand the brine chemistry. So it's all natural electrolytes dissolved in the brine, but each brine behaves differently when we talk about evaporation and precipitation of the salt crystals. So we need to do a lot of test work and make sure we do all of our homework before we commit to the big capital spend of building it. But it's all very, very doable. We just need to keep working away. And we've got evaporation trials starting in the lab at the beginning of January to do that with bulk samples so that we're really understanding how our brine is going to behave and to make sure that we optimise the flow sheet for the process plant.
That's going to bring me on to people in a minute, but before I do, those evaporation trials in January, talk to us about how long they take and what that will do in terms of allowing you to understand this chemical process a bit more.
Yeah, we've already done some trials on that, initial lab trials. So this is our largest sample to date going into the lab to do that. And we anticipate that we'll be producing sulphate of potash product from the brine in the lab so that we can confirm that this is a process that is very, very achievable.
With that product, do you go to potential partners and show them the quality and just how good this product is to get them interested? And first part of the question, would you look to them to partner with you with, as you go further down the track, some of those off-takers?
Yep. Absolutely. So we've already started those conversations in regards to offtake. It's a product that is in short supply globally.
Okay.
We don't have enough of it from natural sources. There is a secondary chemical process where they use a lot of energy to produce the same thing, but from a muriate of potash with sulfuric acid, and they heat it to about 800 degrees, and then they produce 1.2 tonnes of hydrochloric acid, which is really corrosive, for every tonne of sulphate of potash. So globally, we'd rather not use that. We'd much prefer to have more of these natural sources of potassium sulphate or sulphate of potash.
So basically, from an environmental point of view, this is head and shoulders above what the majority of fertiliser is being used at the moment. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. The muriate market's about 70 million tonnes globally.
Yep.
And sulphate of potash with the natural source plus all the secondary source is about 7 million tonnes.
Do you see that flipping in the future because of how good it is for the environment and the pressures, I guess, on countries and globally of all of us to look after the planet?
Yeah, by putting muriate on your crop, you're putting 50% of that volume is chloride, and that's making your acidic soils even more acidic.
Oh, wow.
They're relying, and in adjusting that, they're relying on bringing, especially for broadacre farmers, bringing in gypsum to counteract the pH. And then they're also relying on the rainfall to leach it from the soils and put it into the waterways. So that's having an impact and increasing the salinity in the waterways. So all farmers would much prefer to use sulphate of potash if they could afford it and if it was available. And at the moment, I keep hearing stories in Western Australia that our farmers cannot get hands on enough of this product. And in fact, I don't think there's any available at the moment. So it's really quite critical that we secure our supply chain, being so reliant on fertiliser for agriculture.
Well, and speaking of that, and I do want to talk about Lake Yeo as well, but before we do, can you just give us a big picture? I know that I might be pushing the envelope here a little bit, but when we have an issue of supply-demand imbalance, with your project, when are you thinking you might be able to be in production and supplying sulphate of potash globally?
What we're planning to do is work through all of the economic analyses and the de-risking of the project over the next couple of years, getting our environmental permits done, making sure we really know what our process flow sheet is going to look like. So when we build it, we're building the right project, and we're also building the right size project for the deposit. So we're looking at this stage and our final investment decision in 2025. So that's just 4 years away to do all of that work. And then we can get on to build it and start producing the product for at least a couple of decades, if not more.
So it's a generational wealth building, ladies and gentlemen. Now, I noticed this week that you have brought on an external relations consultant. Why is that important? And the reason I'm asking you this question, Keren, is because I often say to people, you've got to look at the project, but you've also got to look at the people, who's behind it, because you've got to get the right team on board. And I guess especially when it comes to something like sulphate of potash, which can be a little bit, I guess, not tricky, but complex. So yeah. Talk to me about the external relations consultant and why that's important.
Well, Tim Langmead was the former executive in charge of external relations at Fortescue. So he has a really deep network of people across government, across environment, and really great relationships in building community engagement. And it's really important for this project to bring everybody, all of our stakeholders, along on the journey for this. It is a global top 10 project already. So we need to make sure that it's going to deliver on those expectations to really build mines communities can be proud of. So I'm really excited to have Tim on the team. I worked with him briefly when I was at Fortescue for a little while. And when I heard he was available, I picked up the phone and made that call. And that's just his one part of the team. We've also recently appointed a Chief Operating Officer who has 3 years experience in brine projects, just come from BCI, which has just put together its funding package for a $1.2 billion solar salt project in Western Australia. Some really current experience and knowledge around how salt fields work. And also our CFO. We had a CFO start just a few weeks ago, and she comes from an oil and gas background, managing large projects, but like the growth story in the oil and gas. So she started with smaller companies and went all the way through as they became much bigger companies, and can take us on that journey. So this project's attracting some really great talent, and I'm really excited to be bringing everyone into the office.
I can see the excitement. Now we're running out of time. I want to make sure we cover Lake Yeo. So you've got, I think, 2 exploration targets down at Lake Yeo.
Well, Lake Yeo sits in the same interpreted paleo valley as Lake Throssell, and it's downstream. And so the channel does this sort of U-turn. So it's coming down from the northeast, heading to the southwest, and then it does a U-turn before it gets to Gruyere, and then heads off down to the southeast. That project is about another 200 kilometres of strike length in that valley. And we're just out there at the moment doing the first of the gravity surveys to identify where that valley sits, to create the drill targets for next year, so that we can define what might also be very, very close by to Lake Throssell.
So with those two, with Lake Throssell and Lake Yeo being fairly close together, at the end of the day, further down the track, being in the latter half of this decade, would you have one processing plant? How would it work with the sort of processing of the sulphate of potash?
All that will need to be worked out. We will need to have an understanding of just what sort of scale we've got, and that's why we're doing this work so early and not just focusing solely on Throssell at the moment, because we need to make sure we build the right project the first time, and we really need to scope out what the potential of Lake Yeo is, and where the optimal place will be for the process plant, the scale of it, where we put those evaporation ponds, all of that. We really do need to make sure we've done all our homework before we commit to spending a few $100 million on building it.
Right. Now we're coming into Christmas and coming up to the end of 2021, coming into 2022. We've got an investor audience here, Keren. So what I want to, and they're always looking for, what's going to be the next opportunity. Now, I think that Trigg right now is a great opportunity, but what's the work that you're going to be doing? What's the news flow coming into 2022?
I think from the base at the moment, we have a market cap of about $12 million.
Yep.
Lake Throssell already has an NPV of $364 million. And that's
just repeat that, Keren. Just repeat that again. Your market cap is 12 million.
Yep.
And the value of Lake Throssell alone,
yes,
300 and how much?
64 million.
I'd almost ask her to say it again for a third time, ladies and gentlemen, but do you get what we're saying here? The numbers, 12 million market cap, Lake Throssell alone. We're not even talking about the other projects, over 300 million. Sorry, Keren, I think that's a really important point for people to understand how there's a disconnect here at the moment. Not for long, but at the moment.
That's great, Kerry. I love your enthusiasm for this too. And I just wanted to say with that, the base case that we've put into that, we've assumed a price of $550 a tonne for sulphate of potash.
Yep.
But with everything that's going on globally and the demand for food, all fertiliser prices have gone up significantly. And the benchmark price for SOP is now sitting over $800 a tonne.
Wow. Right now it's at 800.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
And astute investors, if they read our announcement on the scoping study, they'll get to the back page, which shows the sensitivity analysis. And for every 10% rise in that SOP price, it has a $144 million impact on our NPV.
So the NPV that you just spoke about before, 300 and something million, that was based on a price of $550 a tonne.
Yep.
It's now 800 a tonne.
Yep.
So we're talking a lot more than that. And potentially by the time you come into production, we're talking about Lake Throssell alone being, the numbers are eye-watering. So it's going to, and what people need to understand is that the profitability of this will start to come back fairly quickly, I would have thought.
Yeah. It's we need to think about the long-term price. So spot movements do have an impact, and an impact over where the analysts will forecast the price to go, but it's definitely going to be higher than 550 when we do the next update. So it's, to me, you know, this is a long-term project. When we build it, it's going to be producing something like, at $550 a tonne, $97 million of free cash flow every year. And that's initial starting point is 21-year mine life.
97 million free cash flow every year, 21-year mine life, but that's just the beginning. So, Keren, what do you think is the reason people? Because look, I'll be frank, your market cap is quite low right now.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think people don't fully understand how big this project is and what the NPV is? I mean, tell me what you think is the disconnect here, because I think it's really important for my investor audience to understand the opportunity rather than what the market thinks at the moment. What's your view?
I think perhaps because we don't really consider how our food is really made. We all go to the supermarket and buy what looks fresh and looks great, and don't really consider that while we're buying the food is because we're looking for nutrients. And those nutrients are elements such as potassium, nitrogen, phosphorus, NPK. When we go down to Bunnings and we buy a fertiliser, that's what we're looking for, plus all the trace minerals and elements. And I know, Keri, you're really passionate about your vitamins and minerals.
I am.
We really do.
Where are they? Hang on. Look, ladies and gentlemen, vitamins and minerals for days. That's because, Keren, we don't get it in our food supply at the moment. But what you're saying is this sulphate of potash product stops the soil from being so acidic. And I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, if you're acidic, trust me, that's when you get sick. Alkaline, acidic. Go back to your basic science. And I'm right, aren't I, Keren? Because that's what happens. All this acidic food coming into us actually leaches from our bones. And, you know, there's a whole bunch of science behind this. So not only is this a great project, but the potential for helping people health-wise is immeasurable.
Yeah. And I'm really passionate about this being an Australian project. We're an Australian company. We're named after one of the founders in Western Australia, Henry Trigg. In WA, we have a really famous beach called Trigg. And agriculture relies on imports of fertiliser, being our nitrogen, being the phosphate, and also the potassium. And that's what we're looking at, is the K in the NPK here, and securing the supply of really good quality fertiliser into Australia so that we can produce better quality food and export better value, so have the economic value add in Australia. But it's also a global project. It's a big project, so we would flood the market if we sold it all here in Australia. So first stop is here, and then it's an international product as well, which will be highly sought after because it's Australian, it's natural, low carbon footprint, and I can't wait to bring it to market.
I can't wait for you to bring it to market as well, but you know how I always end my my interviews, Keren. Right now, I want you to give my investor audience out there three reasons only why they should be sitting up and take. I know the three reasons, but I'm going to let you say three reasons why they should be sitting up and taking notice of Trigg Mining right now. And the ASX code, ladies and gentlemen, is TMG.
So it's the start of a very big story. It's already big and it's only going to get bigger from here. It's top 10 global project. It's going to produce a really natural product for food security. We are currently, Trigg market cap is very much lower than our NPV of the project, and I think there is a lot more upside to tell as we continue to explore the district that we're in. It's in our backyard. It's in Western Australia. We know the jurisdiction. We can get out there very easily and get on and do this job of defining and just working through all of the process of the economic studies to deliver a really fantastic project that we can all, Australia, our investors, our local communities, can be really proud of.
I think that was more than three, ladies and gentlemen, but I let it get away with it because it's Christmas. But I'll tell you what, it's Australian. So we need to be able to support Australia and also the Australian food supply. This is going to make us competitive on a global scale for many, many, many years to come. So, Keren, it's been great to chat to you today. Thank you so much for the update as we head into the end of the year. Congratulations on all the work you're doing and a great team that you're building around you. And let's get you back on in 2022, because I know there's so much news flow that's going to be coming out in the near future. In the meantime, Merry Christmas. See you in 22.
Thank you. You too, Kerry.